Hello, everyone. Welcome to my very first ever LinkedIn Live office hours. I love to hear where everyone is joining from. I'm here in Atlanta. So just drop your comments in the chat. Welcome. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And then I'll talk you through what this hour is going to look like. Okay, I'm hoping everyone can see my screen. Today I am talking about my new AI challenge on LinkedIn Learning. It is all about building an AI agent on AWS in 7 steps in 7 days. It really is that simple to build an AI agent on AWS. In this presentation, I will walk you through what we're building. I'll talk about the features and the architecture. I'll break down each day, and then I will highlight common errors and troubleshooting steps. There are a lot of errors that you can run into as you go through this challenge. And then I'll talk about ways to take your agent to the next level. So, what happens after the 7 days is over? And then I will open up the floor to questions. Now, along the way, if you do have questions, go ahead and feel free to drop them in the chat so that you don't forget. And then I'll circle back at the Q&A time to answer your questions. So I have a question for you. How many of you have actually signed up already and started or completed this challenge? Go ahead and drop your comments in and I'll take a look. I'm hoping some of you have had an opportunity to at least start with the hands-on challenge and you're coming with a lot of questions. And if you haven't started the challenge, this presentation will just give you a good idea of all of the things that we're going to cover and all of the things that you're going to learn. First up, the challenge is free. Yes, it is free until the end of June. So I just want to shout out LinkedIn Learning for making this challenge free for everyone. You don't need a LinkedIn Learning subscription to access it, so really anyone can take it. And so I encourage you to share this free challenge with anyone in your circle that is curious about AI agents, curious about AWS, and just curious about building on AWS. I've put the link here so that you can access it. So let's jump right in and talk about what we are building over the 7 days. So you will build an internal operations assistant or agent called Ops Assistant, and it's essentially an agent that helps with IT support, answering questions. Like all organizations need some level of IT support, and AI can help that process. So we're building Ops Assistant, And we start really at the foundational level. It's going to start as just this basic conversational agent on Amazon Bedrock, and then it's going to evolve over the 7 days into a production grade system. Some of the features that you'll build, the agent will be able to look up IT service ownership. It's going to remember past conversations, which is really important when you think about deploying an agent in production. It's going to have that memory. It's going to be able to pull answers from your documents, which is a true game changer when you're working with Gen AI. You're going to be able to enforce safety boundaries. We all know how important governance is when it comes to AI. And then you'll be able to call that agent from an application and then write logs that you can inspect. There are several services that we'll use over the 7 days to bring this agent to life. The first, of course, is Amazon Bedrock. Within Amazon Bedrock, we'll use the agent functionality, knowledge bases, and guardrails. And then we'll use AWS Lambda in multiple ways. One, it will be for agent tooling, and then also for just the runtime, invocation, and testing the agent. We'll also use Amazon S3. It will store our knowledge base documentation, and it will also store the vector embeddings, and I'll talk more about that later. We'll also use Amazon CloudWatch for model invocation logging, and then, of course, AWS IAM, Identity and Access Management, for service roles and inline policies. Now, this part is very important. When I initially wrote the 7 day challenge, we were using the Claude 3.7 Sonnet Foundation model, version 1. That model has since been retired. So today, if you go into Amazon Bedrock and you go through the model catalog, you'll see this yellow legacy tag next to that model. That means it is essentially retired. And so you have a few other options to replace Claude Sonnet. The first would be Amazon Nova Pro, and I've put that name here on the slide. I've tested it with Nova Pro. There are other foundation models that you can also choose from. Another model that we'll use for the embeddings, Amazon Titan Text Embeddings version 2, that model is still there and available. So a quick look at the architecture and just really trying to walk you through how all of these pieces fit together. I mentioned before that we would use Lambda in two different ways. The first way you see on the far left of the screen is the application code. So Lambda will test the agent that we build. And then with the Amazon Bedrock, I mentioned within that memory, guardrails, and knowledge base that comprises our agent. And then at the top, we have IAM permissions. So the agent needs permissions to call Lambda. Lambda needs permissions to call Bedrock. Bedrock needs permissions to call CloudWatch. So there, we use IAM all over the place from a permission standpoint. And then we also use AWS Lambda for tooling for actions, and I'll talk more about that. And then we use S3 to store our knowledge base, and then we have CloudWatch for logging. So that is just the overall architecture of what we're building. So now let's just jump right in with day one and then some of the errors that you may encounter as you're building out day one. Day one is very simple. This is where you create your agent, and it's just the foundation for your agent. You'll create a new agent using that selected foundation model, in this case, Nova Pro. You'll define clear instructions, so that system prompt that defines your agent's behavior, its goal, what it's supposed to do. And then on day one, you'll have that agent up and running, and you'll be able to test it by sending in questions and start to learn just the baseline behavior of that agent. And then by the end, like I said, you'll have that working agent that can understand questions and respond clearly. And that is just a huge win on day one. And after each day, I encourage everyone to go over to my Keisha on AI page on LinkedIn and just post your daily win. I'll be there cheering you on and answering any questions that you have. Day one, you may run into several errors. So this first error is resource not found exception or access denied. And this goes back to what I said earlier about the Claude 3.7 Sonnet model now being a legacy model. And so instead of using Claude, use Amazon Nova Pro, and there are other Anthropic models that you can choose from as well. But if you see this error, that is the cause. You may even see this error that the ARN you specified was not found. Again, it goes back to the model that you're using. In this case, like I said, use Nova Pro. That should get rid of that error. And then if you do decide, let's say you don't want to use Amazon Nova Pro and you do want to use an Anthropic model, there are other options apart from Sonnet. With Anthropic, you have to be given access to that model. So you'll have to submit a form that details your planned use case and how you plan to use the model. And that goes through an approval process, and you submit that through the model catalog. Now, it does take some time, maybe 5-10 minutes for that approval and all of the processes to run to approve you. And you will get an email once you're approved. But if you do attempt to use the model before you actually have access, you may see this error, access denied, when calling Bedrock. Another step on day one, when you're building your agent, after you fill out all of the information and save your agent, you have to click, there's a button called Prepare, and that's really important to set your agent up so that you can test it. If that button is grayed out and you're not able to click it, first make sure that you've saved your agent. That button is disabled until you save. And let's say you've saved it, but that button is still grayed out and you're in the agent builder, you can navigate back to the agent details page and then use the prepare button from that page. So those are just some of the issues that you may run into and how you can solve it for day one. Now let's jump into day two. Day two is really exciting because with day two, you allow your agent to do things, I say, in the real world. This is essentially where we are taking the Bedrock agent and connecting it to AWS Lambda. And so you can create the Lambda function that exposes like real world capabilities. And the way you do that, you'll define an action group, you'll connect your agent to the Lambda function, and then you'll need to add permissions to allow the agent to invoke that Lambda function that you create. And then you can test how your agent decides when to call that action. Now, outside of the AWS ecosystem, you may have heard the word tool or tools. An agent is going to call a tool. It's basically that same concept is what AWS calls an action. So by the end of day two, you'll have your agent and it can call out to Lambda that allows your agent to interact with the real world. On day two, you may run into permissions issues. Specifically for day two, setting up the proper access and permissions, it is a two-step process on both the Lambda and on the Bedrock agent. So first, the AWS Lambda has to be callable by the Amazon Bedrock service. That's the first part. The second part, Amazon Bedrock has to be allowed to call out to AWS Lambda. So just remember for day two, and it's easy to remember, 2 and 2. Day two, it's a two-step process for permissions. if your permissions aren't set up correctly, you may get an error saying that the agent can't call out to the Lambda tool. And so, like I said, it's mainly a two-step process. So the agent's IAM service role needs an inline policy that grants it Lambda invoke function. And then the Lambda function needs a resource-based policy that allows Bedrock to invoke it. And then set up the Open API schema and save that as well. So if you run into that issue, know that it's a permissions issue. And like I said, it's a two-step process on day 2. Day 3, this is where you give your agent memory and context. And that part is really important because if your agent can't remember its past conversations, like what's the point? You have to start over every single time you talk to your agent, and that just really defeats the purpose. And so with day 3, you're going to help your agent remember previous conversations. And it's a very simple step to do that in the Bedrock console. You enable that memory for your agent, and then it really starts to teach you the concept of stateless requests versus stateful requests in conversations. And then when you test it, make sure you test it with that prior context. So give it a question, and then your follow-up question, don't repeat some of the things that you put in the first question just to see if it remembered that context. But if you set it up correctly and you configure it, by the end of that day, your agent will remember conversations. And when you go into the Amazon Bedrock screen, you can set the memory duration in days. So 5 days, 10 days, 30 days. And you can also set the maximum number of sessions for it to remember our conversation. So remember the last 5, the last 10, the last 20. So all of that can be configured based on your needs. Day 4, this is where you actually take that agent and you ground it with a knowledge base. So specifically, you provide the agent with domain knowledge that is very specific to your use case. So you prepare a small set of documents, you load those into Amazon S3, and then you go into the Amazon Bedrock screens and you create a knowledge base and allow it to ingest your documents. And then you're able to test that agent by asking questions very specific to the documents that you've uploaded. So now your agent has its general knowledge or its pre-trained knowledge supplemented with the additional documentation that you've uploaded. And so with this challenge, I've provided you all with 3 sample files that you can upload, and you can find those files and really all of the code samples in the course's GitHub repo. But I've given you an incident playbook. That's very important for IT ops agent, an escalation policy, and also just a service overview. So just all of that additional information that the agent can use to answer questions. So day 4, just a peek behind the scenes, and this is what I mentioned earlier about embeddings and vector data stores. So essentially, like I mentioned, we upload the 3 files into an S3 bucket. That's the source data. And then we use Amazon Titan Text Embeddings version 2 to take that data and create vectors for semantic similarity search. Those vectors are stored for this challenge in Amazon S3 vectors. You do have the option to store it in like the OpenSearch serverless and other services, but to try to keep costs down for this, I instructed you all to use Amazon S3 vectors. And so, like I said, you put it in S3, create the knowledge base, which runs the embedding models and then stores the vectors in S3 for easy searching. So now whenever you pose a question to the agent will check its knowledge base, search for that similarity, and use the results to help inform the answer that it sends back to you. One thing to note about this, whenever your data changes, so let's say I've given you 3 files, maybe later you decide to add that fourth file, you'll need to do what's called a resync to pick up that new file and create the new vectors associated with that data. On day 4, you may encounter this error here if you are logged in with the root user, basically saying you cannot create a knowledge base as the root user. You'll need to sign in with an IAM user or an IAM role instead, and this is just due to the AWS security best practices that restrict root account usage. So if you see that error, that's how you fix it. Day 5, we're coming close to day 7. Day 5, this is where you're able to control your agent's behavior, essentially giving your agent guidance when answering sensitive questions or really any type of question. You can provide guardrails around that. So you create a guardrail that defines allowed and disallowed behaviors. You then take that guardrail, you attach it to your agent, and then you can test how your agent responds to requests that fall outside of its boundaries. Specifically for this challenge, some of the denied topics are questions related to passwords. So this is a IT support agent. You try to ask it for the password to the production database, or you try to ask it to tell you the API keys for a certain service. That the agent will block those questions and not respond because we've put those guardrails in place. So just think about, as you take what you've learned and you apply it to your real world use case, what are some of the questions or things that you don't want your agent to do? You just simply set up a guardrail for that. Day 6, so we have our agent, it has memory, it has guardrails, it has additional knowledge. Now it's time to take that and make it available to other applications within the ecosystem. So on day 6, you're going to create a Lambda function or quote unquote Lambda app that is going to call your agent, send in prompts, and get responses. And in order to do that, you'll create an agent alias, and that allows your agent to be invoked outside of Amazon Bedrock. You'll capture the agent ID and the alias ID, and that allows you to call that agent programmatically. On day 6, you invoke that agent from Python using the Bedrock agent runtime, and then you get the results back. And from there, you can decide what needs to happen next. But by the end of day 6, you're using your agent within an application. There are some permissions that need to happen on day 6. The AWS Lambda that you've created has to be able to call Amazon Bedrock. So it's going to need the Bedrock invoke agent, and you set that up through IAM. You may encounter a few errors on that day. And the first, your Lambda may time out when trying to call that agent. When you first set up a Lambda, the default timeout is 3 seconds. That is not a lot of time, and agent invocations take longer. So you can just go to the configuration screen and change that timeout from 3 seconds to 5 minutes. You may also see this error that the Lambda cannot invoke the Bedrock agent, and that is the permissions that I just mentioned to you, that your Lambda's execution role needs an inline policy that grants it access to Bedrock. And then we have day 7. So the very last day of the challenge is about making your agent's actions observable. So you have this agent, it's running in production. How do you monitor and track the actions it's taking and what it's doing? And so you'll need to enable what's called model invocation logging for your agent. And you do that through the Amazon Bedrock UI. And you can trace the output just to understand your agent, how it's reasoning, why it's making certain decisions, why it's calling the tools or actions you have. And all of that will be in the CloudWatch logs. So you'll create a log group, you'll set up permissions, and you turn on model invocation logging. Day 7, there are more permissions that need to happen. Amazon Bedrock needs the ability to write to Amazon CloudWatch logs. So you'll create an IAM role, attach an IAM policy with the create log and put log events, and then you'll attach that role to Amazon Bedrock. So day 7, that is it. So you have created this agent and it's running, you're calling it from external systems. And I always, with every challenge, I always like to have stretch goals because some people will breeze through days 1 through 7 and need an extra challenge. So when you think about Ops Assistant, what could come next after day 7, you can change the design so that it is a multi-agent system. So for example, you add a triage agent that is that front door that looks at requests first and then passes it to IT Ops. And then using Agent Core, this is a fairly new managed platform that handles the infrastructure for you so that you can just really focus on building your agent. And with Agent Core, it comes with a runtime, so where your agents run. It comes with a gateway. How do your agents connect to tools? It comes with memory. It comes with identity, like who your agent is allowed to be, policy, what they're allowed to do, evaluations, how they're doing at their job, and observability, what we talked about with CloudWatch. So that is really all I have from a presentation standpoint. I hope you all are having fun learning about agents and building on AWS. So now I will stop sharing and open the floor to questions. Okay. Oh, I see a lot. I'm just seeing the comments now. I see Rochelle from San Diego, Ivan from Armenia, Angie McCormick. Hi, Angie. Yes, it's going to be recorded and I will share it out. I'll also share the presentation. All right, and then I see a question. Do each of these AWS services cost or do they come together with one subscription? So a lot of the services that I shared do offer what's called a free tier. So the very first time you you sign up for an AWS account and you log in, a lot of the services like Lambda, CloudWatch, they have a free tier. Once you go over that free tier, there will be a charge for this simple 7-day hands-on challenge. I'm trying to remember how much I ended up paying. I think it was like $1 and something for the Bedrock piece and using those models. But this is something I forgot to mention in the slide deck. I do have AWS credits that I can share. So $50 a person. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn Learning and I will send over for the first, I don't have unlimited credits. So I would say for the first 10 people that message me on LinkedIn, I will send over $50 in AWS credits so that you do not incur a charge and can just play around until your $50 runs out. Angie, did I see your second question? Will I be hosting these office hours again? It really depends on your feedback. If you find this helpful, I would love to at least once a month have office hours for some of the like AI challenges I have on the LinkedIn Learning platform and some of the courses that I have. So yeah, I would love to continue this. Another question, what part of this challenge did you find most challenging? Yeah, so for me personally, it's all of the permissions because throughout like the 7 days of building, I often got like access denied or this can't access that. And that can be so frustrating when you're trying to figure out why can't Bedrock call my Lambda or why can't my Lambda call Bedrock? So just using the identity and access management service, IAM, and just making sure the permissions are set up correctly, to me, that was the most challenging piece. Any other questions? Well, I would love to hear from you all. When I think about like what my next challenge should be, what would you all find helpful? Just drop that in the comments. So this was actually my second AI challenge where I partnered with LinkedIn Learning. My very first AI challenge was really geared toward a non-technical audience, and it was a 15-day challenge, a 15-day hands-on challenge, just really trying to introduce AI across a lot of different platforms like OpenAI, Claude. So that hands-on challenge, that was my very first challenge. It's still out there. And then this challenge focused on AI agents, specifically on AWS. And I'm trying to come up with what my third challenge will be. My goal is to host a challenge, one per quarter. So I have two more that I need to figure out what I'm going to do. So please just drop your comments in there and I will start to build those challenges and then host office hours. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And like I said, this hands-on challenge is free through June, so please take advantage of that and share it. And then connect with me on LinkedIn and follow my Keisha on AI page. There I will be answering questions about any of the challenges that I have on the platform. Thank you so much for your time.